Senator Rubio, I think you've been very clear about this, and I totally affirm your position that the #1 position of the chief executive and the government is national security. Estimates are that Iran will have the bomb within months, no matter what happens. We obviously have this, you know what I'm talking about, the silliness in Washington as far as what the president is doing. This is going to destabilize the entire international scene. And I think most Americans have no clue that this is coming as quickly as it's coming and what kind of impact it's going to have.
Yes.
I'd love to hear your views on, if you were in the White House, how do you deal with this? We have a president who basically is, well, they're going to get it. What do we do? You know, I think you probably have a different perspective on that.
I do. Let me do two things. First, I'm going to tell you, let me just describe the nature of the problem more in depth, and then I'll tell you what we need to do about it at this point, even though we've lost a lot of leverage because of what this president has already done. First of all, the risk of Iran is not limited to just nuclear weapons. This is not even being discussed in these negotiations with Iran. First of all, Iran is the premier sponsor of terrorism on the planet. They have multiple groups around the world that they sponsor to carry out terrorist attacks as a form of statecraft. I mean, they use terrorism the way normal nations use diplomacy. I mean, that's literally what they do. And that isn't even being discussed, and that's going on unabated. Second, a nuclear capability isn't just limited to a bomb. You have to have a delivery system. Iran is developing long-range rockets that will, at some point, in less than a decade, be capable of reaching the east coast of the United States. Those are not part of the talks. A weapon design, they can buy. They haven't bought it already. The third thing that it takes is the ability to enrich uranium or reprocess plutonium. And even under the most generous reading of the deal the president is trying to sell us, they retain the infrastructure to enrich and reprocess. And what we're trusting them is that if we want to inspect them, they will let us. Well, we've seen this movie before. It was called Iraq. We would say, listen, we want to go in and inspect. Saddam was saying, no, you can't. And then 90 days later, they'd finally let you in. They had cleaned up the site. 90 days later, he'd do the same game again. We've seen this movie before. It's called North Korea. There is no doubt that Iran wants to acquire a nuclear weapon. Now, they are willing to put on a charade in the short term because they want these sanctions lifted, because they want more access to the money. But in the long term, they will want a weapon because it furthers their ultimate ambition, and that is to be a regional hegemonic power. They want to be the single most powerful country in that area of the world. They want to drive America out of that region. They want the whole region to be under their domain, and they're already acting on that ambition. Today, you find Iranian influence in Lebanon, in Syria, increasingly in Iraq. You find it in Yemen now. You find it in Bahrain. This is the truth about what their ambitions are all about. A nuclear weapon is just a part of it, the most dangerous part of it. Our president should have never entered into these negotiations. These international sanctions in combination... The international sanctions in combination with U.S. unilateral sanctions were having a devastating impact on Iran. And the choice for them was very clear. You can either have nuclear ambitions or you can have an economy, but you cannot have both. And it was having a real strain on them. It was threatening their regime stability. And that's why they finally decided to come to the table. But they knew as soon as they sat down for the first time that this president wanted the deal worse than they did. That John Kerry wanted this deal worse than they did. And now what they've been able to do is basically disrupt the entire international sanctions regime. In fact, China and Russia are already all in. The Russians have already sold them anti-aircraft weapons. The Chinese are already saying they're going to build reactors in there. And now all we're left with is the opportunity to impose unilateral sanctions. But putting together those international sanctions is going to be very difficult. And here's the last hard truth. We may have to decide at some point what is worse. War or a military strike against Iran or a nuclear-armed Iran. And I will just say this. I am not cheerleading for war. I don't want there to be the need to use military force. But a nuclear is an unacceptable risk for the region and the world.